It's your boy, Remoy George Philip the First.
And I'm Samantha Nzesi. This
is Masculinity.
The show that investigates the performance of masculinity in the world today, and you know we spell it with a hard K.
Samantha?
Remoy, yes?
It's playoff time in the MNBA. See what I did there? Like the men's NBA. You know what I'm doing?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Way to ally. Good job.
I mean, that's technically not my joke. Shout out to our friend Ida Harden out there who I stole that joke from.
Shout out to Ida.
But have you been watching it all?
I watched the Clippers get scraped, and I was like, you know what? I need a break from this. Let me focus on wedding planning.
An MNBA fan. What about the WNBA? Have you been watching Caitlin Clark or Angel Reese, like rookie debuts out here hooping?
I watched a little bit of the Caitlin Clark game, but you know what? I have to say, I didn't appreciate Angel Reese. I felt like there should have been a bigger welcome for her.
Well, we know what that's about.
I didn't appreciate the way she was welcomed. Yeah, but, I digress. There's more to talk about there.
Well, we'll chalk up some of your lack of basketball watching attention to the excitement for what we're talking about in this episode, right?
Okay. All right. I mean, if I deserve that, fine. I mean, we have a guest today who knows so very much about what we're getting into, and I'm so excited to have you. Izzy Chan, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Hello. I'm not sure what you want me to say.
No, that's perfect. Okay, Izzy, you're actually a documentarian, amongst many things.
Mm-hmm.
You're a shaper of narratives, if you will.
Yes.
Without totally giving away what this episode is about or the title of your documentary, maybe you could tell the audience in a roundabout way what we're discussing.
All right. Well, we're looking at societies that actually is kind of very different than how our society is structured in terms of gender roles.
That's a really good way to put what we're discussing today, and that's a great tease. So, the reveal of what we're getting into, that's after this break.
Curious about next-gen men? We're a small part of a much larger movement to undefine masculinity for a brighter future. Our mission is clear: empower the next generation to use their curiosity, empathy, and courage to build a more equitable world. Join the Next Gen Men community as we learn and unlearn together. We're here to support boys and men to break free from limiting stereotypes. We're not just an organization, we're a catalyst for reimagining masculinity and fostering inclusivity. We're here to help open up possibilities for what men and boys can be. Explore the world of Next Gen Men at nextgenmen.ca and join the community to make a difference. Next Gen Men, shaping tomorrow's leaders one step at a time. Join us and help undefine masculinity and empower the next generation of men to lead with empathy and courage.
Welcome back. Okay, Samantha.
Yes, Remoy?
A lot of times we're talking patriarchies.
We do.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you have a lot of opinions, or as Americans say, opinions. Maybe all people say opinions about said patriarchy.
Yes, all of the opinions. Obviously, patriarchy is designed to rip us away from joy and liberation. That's my first opinion. So I'll just go with that for now.
Well, that's a great opinion you have. I'm just going to make sure that you as the copy editor don't correct me on opinion. Today, we're going to enlighten you with another perspective, per se.
Just want to say that copy editor is correct. You've written text, but also yes.
And they correct their Remoys. That's fine. That's a verbal thing you were correcting, but fine. Yeah, okay.
Well played.
We're going to go another direction today. What we're talking about. Actually, we have a guest with us who's working on a documentary series about it. Izzy.
Hello.
Welcome. How about you tell us the name of that series?
It's called Matriarch. That's really, I want to keep it straightforward and simple. Matriarch. If you want the subtitle, it's called In a Women's World.
Ooh, all right. Yes, I think Samantha's into that. And there's
You better be into it too, by the way.
Yeah, I'm leading this episode. Izzy, there's correct me if I'm wrong, there's 4 different matriarchies you're aiming to cover in this series?
That's correct. I have already visited with 3 of the 4. There is the Moswo in China, in the mountains of China. There is the Minangkabau in West Sumatra in Indonesia. There are the Tuaregs in Africa, and they're a nomadic tribe. And I've been visiting a village in Niger. Now, I'll be honest, the Tuaregs are in transition. They used to be matriarchal. Now they're kind of in there's a lot going on in Africa, a lot of pressures that's affecting their matriarchal traditions. And then there is the Khasi in India. I haven't visited them yet, but I've been studying about them. They are fascinating. They are another indigenous group in India. And all these matriarchies are indigenous groups in places that traditionally you might have not have thought of as matriarchal. You know, China, Han Chinese culture, very patriarchal. India, very patriarchal. So it's interesting that the matriarchal groups in these communities are actually not the mainstream group, but the indigenous, the original groups in those regions.
Yes, I kind of know a little about the Khasi a little bit. I wonder, Samantha, do you know of any of these groups, or have you kind of heard of any of these groups or know of them?
So I've heard of the most women, actually, because anytime you like look into matriarchy, that's like the main one that comes up. And there's been, I think, a couple books written about them. And I believe I've heard of some of the ones in Indonesia, but not the one you mentioned. So excited to hear about this. Yeah.
Well, I think, okay, so in the second half of the episode, we can ask more questions and learn about those particular matriarchies and their importance. But now, actually, I want to take you both through two other matriarchal societies. This is going to be fun.
Yes.
And along the way, unravel maybe what exactly matriarchy is. How does that sound?
That sounds awesome. Lead us in the matriarchy, Remoy. Do it.
This feels weird leading the two. Whatever. Okay, fine. Whatever.
I know. I love it. It's the guy who's going to teach us about matriarchies. Yes. I love this.
It's like mansplaining matriarchy is weird, dog, but whatever.
I mean, I don't know about mansplaining, but I feel like leadership, like women in leadership have to espouse patriarchy. So you're doing the good work. You're doing the good work.
Thanks, dog. I also want to say, like, I think we just need to say, like, a lot of the anthropology that got me this research comes from like patriarchal kind of practices and colonial practices. And not just to say it, but just to say it to document it, but also to like, we're using this to like unlearn, right? And so it's challenging, but it's a challenge we're here for, and I'm here for, and I hope you all are as well. Cool?
That's a good note. Yep.
Yes.
Okay, but like, let's get into it. Like, just a fun little thought experiment. If you two were born like in a matriarchal or matrilineal society, what do you think your experience would be like? Or what would that experience be like to grow up in that?
Why don't you start? Because I have a lot to say. I'm so excited.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'll be cheating, right? Because I went to a few matriarchies already. I've been visiting. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go. Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind is like men being in the kitchen at the same time. They also do the cleaning up. I get to have a glass of whiskey or whatever while watching the game while like my brothers and uncles are in the kitchen. Oh my God, please. Honestly, I feel like that's like a low-hanging fruit, but that would be amazing. I would like to start there. Yes. Oh my God.
Literal LOL.
I love that. I gotta say, this reminded me after my first visit to a matriarchy. I did not see that, and so but I was still trying to figure out what to feel. And I remember talking to one of my advisors, right, saying, "Oh, I'll be honest, I'm a little disappointed. I'm not seeing what I expected to see." And then she turned around and said, "What were you expecting to see?" And I wasn't able to say what you said because I guess I was embarrassed to say that. and I was like, well, and then I'll be honest, actually, she did challenge me. "So you expect women standing around with machine guns and like yelling orders, you know?" And I'm like,
exactly.
I think so, but I'm like, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Just not what I saw, which is what I did see men helping out a lot in the house. Like men will take care of kids, men will help with some elements of the house. That said, though, it's not like, ooh, the women are sitting back. They're working hard. They're still the ones working harder. They're the ones directing things. So there isn't this sense of they're sitting back. They're still the ones in charge of the house. And I think that's what got me disappointed. Why are they the ones still so in charge of the house and the kids? And And
I think that's a good question. I feel like it feeds into different misconceptions that we have about matriarchy, right? The fact that like it's like a one-to-one with patriarchy. And I feel like something else that we don't quite understand is like, okay, we hear matriarchal societies, we hear matrilineal societies. Like, can you kind of explain what the difference is?
yeah, and then there's also matrilocal too, if you want to get all like weedy about into the weeds about this. Yeah, so matrilineal means you take the mother's name, right? So the kids, instead of taking the father's name, they actually a family lineage is traced through the mother's line instead of the father's line, which happens in patriarchy. Matrilocal talks about societies where they actually stay in the mother's house, because in a lot of traditional villages, with extended families, you might stay in the father's house. It's patrilocal. So, when you get married, you move into your husband's house. Whereas in matrilocal, it means that the mother's house is central. You stay at your mother's house. When you get married, you move into your wife's place. So those are the more nitty-gritty differences. However, I intentionally call my documentary Matriarch and use the term matriarchy. And generally, unless I'm defining things specifically like now, I don't try to use the word matrilineal, because I agree with a lot of my advisors in matriarchal studies, a lot of women pioneers from the 60s, 70s, that the traditional academic patriarchy intentionally, they refuse to acknowledge the existence of matriarchies. When you bring up these societies, they go, oh, they're only matrilineal. They're not matriarchal. They're only, matrilocal. They're making it small. They're minimizing it. It's just this. And it's because they have taken for themselves, we define patriarchy our way. And because matriarchy is not just this exact copy of patriarchy in the reverse, we say that matriarchy doesn't exist. And so I think while I know those terms and I could explain it, I intentionally choose to use matriarchy. And if someone challenges me, it's like, oh, aren't you being inaccurate? Isn't it really just matrilineal? I say, let me explain to you, what matriarchy really means, because I refuse to cede that term.
That's so smart. And I think going to an earlier point, that particular type of labor, whether it's governing the home or some of these family care kind of roles and responsibility, that labor is actually more appreciated in these societies versus what we see in traditional patriarchal societies, where that labor is just seen as free labor and tossed to the side. And so this kind of shifting of the kind of the focus and expectation is really special. And I think there's actually, okay, so let's get into this first matriarchy that I want to share with you. It's really powerful and interesting to watch here. It's actually in West Africa, specifically in Guinea-Bissau. Samantha, I'm wondering, have you ever been, for those who don't know, Samantha's parents were born in Cameroon, and you were actually very, very recently in Africa, right?
Yeah, it was awesome. It was just in Nairobi, but I have never been to Guinea-Bissau. I wish. I've only been to Cameroon once or twice as an adult, so it's on my list. Izzy, have you?
No, I've only been to Niger, and I'm going again in July.
Well, speaking, Guinea-Bissau is a small country on the western seaboard of Africa, tucked in between Gambia and Guinea. It's also comprised of a place called the Bissagos, which is an archipelago of 88 islands stretching into the Pacific, only which 22 are inhabited.
Okay, well, what does that actually look like, though?
I don't want to show photos, but the Telegraph describes it as this dizzying network of contorted creeks, secret sandbanks, magnificent mangrove forests, and and they also use this really interesting language, the islands of the archipelago are a navigator's nightmare, right? So you can kind of see it protecting this biological geographical way of protecting these native cultures from Western expansion.
Well, so that sounds like something that a lot of places could have used is like something protecting their land from Western expansion. But I'm assuming you're going to say about the
Bisagos, yeah.
That you're going to say that so all the women are ruling these islands, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. There's like the society there, the Bajegos. They are the ones that inhabit the island, and it's like the women who are the spiritual leaders who hold kind of everyone accountable to respect the land, right?
Yes.
So all the women are the spiritual leaders.
No, like there's like regular people, women that just every day, like, but there's like these specific priestesses who hold council.
Okay, so these priestesses is what makes the society matriarchal.
Yes. It just comes back to the legend that there are these 4 daughters on these islands, right? And each daughter has like a vested with like these special powers and rights by her grandmother. And that means including like managing the land, the sea, agriculture, and also the power of rain and wind. All the Bajegos currently can trace their lineage back to one of these 4 sisters. And that's how their clan is determined, basically which daughter they descend from.
Wow.
Is it okay? Can I just say how nice it is to hear like a creation myth that doesn't involve a bunch of dudes? Yeah.
I love it. So, like the founding myths, like that's a big part of my documentary. I want to capture all the founding myths of these matriarchies. And the one you just said, it's beautiful, right? That young men and young women grow up with these images and stories. And these things make a big difference to how we see, you know, sort of the gender differences. And I think
100%.
growing up, where the only stories we have are male-centric, the founding, you know, stories of cultures, of nations, of myths, you know. So yes, I think that's beautiful. And when you talk about the land, that's also another commonality amongst matriarchies. Because when you think of from a patriarchal perspective, when we think matrilineal, we just think, oh, name and property, things we own, passed on through the female line. But the way matriarchies think of it is they're taking care of the land. So while they hold it, it's more about stewardship. It's about guardianship and protecting it for the tribe, for the family, and for the future generations.
That's awesome. So do you know of any other cultures actually that have this female-led like creation myth?
A lot of them. Like the Moswo, there's the Gamu. It's actually a mountain there. That's the Gamu goddess. And they still have a festival every year where they go and dance around the mountain. And then in the Tuaregs are founded by a warrior queen, the Tinhina, the warrior queen. Amazing. And she's part myth and part actually, she's, I think, based on a real woman because there is a tomb for her in southern Algeria. So it's really interesting that they have that. And then in the Minangkabau too, the Bundok Kanduang is, well, it's what they now call the matriarch of a household, but it's also the original queen of the Minangs, and a lot of the Minang people, I believe, to be descended from her and her children.
Wow. So can't wait for the documentary. I'm like ready for it today. But yeah, so I'm still curious about this Bisago of the Bajegos society. So what you're saying is that there are no kings, there are no princes in this society. Like it's just women ruling the day all day.
Well, there are chiefs, like, so men can be chiefs of villages, like in most West and Central African cultures. And traditionally, they are appointed by the female priestesses. Those processes have evolved over decades, centuries on different islands. And in some communities, there are now elections. Izzy, I'm wondering, would you have any idea what the roles of the chiefs are?
I'm not familiar with that tribe, but it sounds very similar to what I've observed in the other matriarchies, where this is where it's like, it's different than patriarchies. Like men, except for the Kasi, we'll go back to that, but men generally are not oppressed. So men are not oppressed. They have important roles. So the uncle often plays an important role. Sometimes in tribes, for instance, in the Minangkabau, the men might hold datok. They're called the datok, kind of a chief role. But their role, though, is to gather the opinions of the women and the tribe. And the matriarch is still the one driving a lot. Oh, driving is the wrong word. It's like collecting and facilitating and gathering the opinion of the group and then synthesizing it and deciding what that all means. And the datok, the men, they will take that, and all the different chiefs of the different tribes, when it's kind of a bigger issue, then come together. From a Westerner's perspective, you might think, oh, the men are still driving the decisions. No, they're carrying the perspectives from their groups, driven a lot or guided a lot by the women, and coming together to share and talk about it. And then they bring back what the thoughts and reactions are from the other tribes back to their tribe. So men play very important roles. And even in a family, right? People, of course, the matriarch comes first, but the uncle, the brother of the matriarch, plays a very respected and important role. And it's because of this that the academic patriarchs, I'll call them, my shorthand for them, said, oh, there are no matriarchies. Men play such important roles in this. The women can't do it alone. They're not really matriarchs. And so it's like, no, wow. It is a much more, it's about understanding. It's knowing that everyone has a role, and that doesn't mean that they're not a matriarch. It's a whole different way of structuring society and power sharing.
It's like not based on exploitation, basically.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's very similar in the Bajegos. Yeah, the men and these chiefs kind of settle the community, and like manage the community support and community matters. But like we're talking about, like nowadays, as more and more Western influence seeps in, they have more authority, and those things are changing. But still, it's a little different between men and the women in specific ways.
So, like, how is it different?
Again, going back to like the spiritual side of things, like men can be seen within this culture as like incomplete beings, and they have to intentionally enhance their orabak, which is like their spiritual life force or their soul, or kind of words like that throughout their lives. So.
Men, incomplete. Finally, somebody is telling the truth. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, yeah. I do. I mean, actually, now that you mention it, like my orabak is feeling very full right about now. How is your orabak feeling?
Wow. I'm feeling not too bad. Yeah. I love what you said, that there is a saying amongst the Minang that because they also have changed, and sometimes who gets to be the datok is actually through elections. And one of the things they say when it's like, oh, who should be the datok? When people talk, they say, well, is he like a good mother?
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Love.
Hell yeah.
And being like a good mother is a quality. It's kind of the reverse of us, right? Can she wear the pants? Can she make the hard decisions?
Fascinating.
Yeah. So matriarchies are basically cultures that are centered around nurturing qualities, about communal, sort of values. And even, so men can play important roles, but the way they're judged is, can they do that? Can they be nurturing? Can they be caring? Are they going to focus on the good of the community and not just personal good?
Let's stick with that. Like, this is a little bit more pointed, but it's like in this society, there's a way that we can say the Bajego women kind of nurture the family and growth in a way that they choose their husbands and propose to them. I'm actually wondering, can either of you two guess what this proposal situation may look like?
Ooh, I want to know.
So she's not dropping out on one knee with like some random piece of jewelry to commemorate like her owning him?
Multi-million-dollar piece of jewelry, blood diamonds?
No. I'm going to assume she's going to bring bucketfuls of, I don't know, is it fish and fruit and to show that the husband is going to marry into a family where we got our land.
It's a good guess, Samantha. Why don't you drum roll us? gets better every time. The women in this society propose by, get ready, they place a cooked meal in front of their potential man's house. The man accepts the proposal by eating the meal. And then, like we talked about, the husband will move into the wife and her family's home.
So, Remoy, I'm assuming this is your bag, right? This is like...
Why do you think I brought this up? What do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, I like to cook. I mean, I love to cook, but of course. Feed me, propose to me, let me be your house husband, ladies. Let's go.
Wow. Oh my God. I mean, first of all, that's amazing. And also petition to have that be changed in the West as well. Like, please just start dropping off like buckets of food, like a nice prepared meal. You know, I mean, if I wasn't already getting married, I would say I like the drizzle on the plate. You know how the chefs do?
Oh.
Yeah. Make it look pretty. Make it look pretty. Yeah.
Well, as we've been talking about, this has started to change. And as I said, patriarchal culture has started to seep in, causing people in the community to question traditions, not just gender-wise, but generationally. But the positive is there are pockets of resistance. A lot of women in the Basago Islands are fighting for the younger generations to retain these older cultural traditions.
I'm into that. I think that's awesome. So, and I'm actually wondering, Izzy, with the cultures that you're documenting, have you seen this kind of generational push and pull?
That is part of the urgency of the documentary, is how do we capture these stories before they shift? What I worry is, are they going to change too much? Because right now they've survived the mainstream culture's domination. But what is hard to survive is our cell phones, our modern culture. It's modern culture, basically. We're moving towards this global Western-driven culture, right? From even though I know people think of TikTok as a Chinese company, the truth is TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all of this is creating this global culture that takes away a lot of the cultural differences. You see, in Moscow, I see the young girls all watching Peppa Pig in Cantonese, right? In Mandarin. So they're not speaking in Moscow anymore. They're speaking Mandarin. Because what the phones do is what you see will be in the mainstream culture's language. So here in the US means it's English. And then if you're growing up in China, that means it's, instead of speaking Moscow, you're speaking Mandarin, right? You forget your ways. And that all is part of it.
So this is all super interesting, and I want to hear so much more about this. And I'm wondering actually if there are any matriarchies stateside. Are there any matriarchies or matrilineal or matriarchal cultures in the West anywhere?
Oh, I'm so glad you bring it up. That's actually the Remoy. Do you have your second matriarch? Yeah. Is it from the West?
Good timing. Yeah. Let's talk about this. It's actually in, if we're going to talk about patriarchy and ownership and things of that, in my state of New York. That was until Samantha, you abandoned me and left me for California. That's fine.
COVID.
Whatever.
This wasn't my fault. I mean, it was. All right.
COVID gets all the blame. Well, this land was the site of a pretty populous matriarchy, their name, the Haudenosaunee, which means people of the Longhouse. That's also referred to in the French, the word Iroquois or Iroquois. And they've become known as kind of now as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy that unites groups of matrilineal societies that are broken up by clan. Are you familiar with them and how their clan structure works?
Not in grand detail, but I'm familiar with the Haudenosaunee as well as the what they used to be called the Navajo, the Dine, and that's another one that's also matriarchal in tradition. Yeah, but go on. I love hearing about them.
Yeah, it's so the clan structure breaks out, it's linked to each clan has a common female ancestor, and those ancestors have specific images or icons. For example, if everyone is in the Wolf clan, then they have the same female ancestor. And within the society, the men live with their families similarly until they get married. And then when they marry, they are married into a different clan or under a different animal icon. And that meant they would move into their wife's home with her, her family, an extended family.
So this is where you become a house husband? You could have been a house husband, keeping up with the house husband.
Hey, man.
I'm
just out here trying to tell stories, house husband me up. No? I would move into the longhouse. I ain't mad at that.
I mean, with a meal first, which is nice. Yeah.
Let's go. But these structures, these longhouses are filled with like family units. And I'm not talking like the small nuclear family of like the Americas or the like European persuasion.
Wait, so this might be a dumb question, but like the longhouse is literally like an actual house, right? Like it's not like symbolism for something else.
Smart question and not a dumb question because it's one I had myself. Let me see if I can screen share some photos and have you guys talk about what you're seeing. I'm wondering, what are you folks seeing? Is it a long house?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's literally a longhouse.
What does it look like,
It's
or
real
what is
long.
kind of how's it built?
Real long. It doesn't have windows. That's
Yeah.
what my first reaction is.
Me too. It looks strong. I mean, so it's like basically constructed with a bunch of like different sized wood planks. And then it has like kind of these like wooden columns that are like holding them together and what looks like a tin roof. And I think actually that might be a skylight.
Yes, that was like a more modern reconstruction. This is kind of an illustration of what these communities would look like. So as you can see, it's like communities of longhouses. And so it's all these different families living in these specific like units.
Yeah.
You know, when I first read about that, it made me think. So with the Minangkabau, they also have the longhouse. They have a longhouse where extended families related. So the mother, her kids, and then when they get married, their families, the men move in. So it's a multi-generation, multi-family longhouse. So I was like, oh, wow, they even use the same term, but it looks very different.
Yeah, that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's like actually kind of true here too, because like at first these longhouses held like 20 to 30 people, but they would grow up to like, it's reported like up to 100 members, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you've got like a bunch of families in there, up to 100 people. How do the gender roles play out like in like a longhouse?
Yeah, it's reportedly like the men did the hunting and the fishing and managed the matters of trade, and the women managed the kind of rest of the home kind of caring and things of that nature. That's until obviously the Europeans arrived, and that's where it gets interesting. But the women were still the leaders who managed the lineage and kind of the custom.
So the Bajegos got to have, I mean, the men still had their leadership kind of roles. Is that the same case here with the Hautenosaunees?
Yeah, it's actually similar in a way, like the clan mother. So for the Hautenosaunees, like the clan mother would appoint a chief or a hoyone, and that means like caretaker of the peace. And they'd be responsible for like the clan's like representation in the Grand Council. So like, as he was saying, the men play a role, and it's roles of leadership. And this particular one in that Grand Council where the chiefs or the men kind of would appear, it's kind of considered one of the oldest representative democracies. The Grand Council is made up of 50 chiefs who resolve disputes and make sure everyone's good. Like, and the website like that I found this information. It kind of describes how these chiefs are chosen. I just want to read that to you. Cool.
Yep.
It goes, quote, "Clan mothers choose men who are honest, reliable, and clear-headed, with knowledge of Confederacy laws and values. They must not gossip, have committed adultery, and must possess honorable qualities and make them true mentors for their people. Chiefs must not have committed any crimes, and any chief to commit a crime while in office will be stripped of his title."
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah, right. It makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking that clan mothers should be choosing like political leaders all across the world, really, starting with the United States.
Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned a little earlier about, you were asking about the gender roles, right, Samantha, inside a longhouse. And that made me think, so actually one of my advisors, she is Haudenosaunee. So, so Professor Barbara Mann. And one of the things that she helped me understand, she was the one who kind of called me out when saying, "What do you mean you were disappointed when you went?" And so on the surface, right, like, from especially a modern feminist perspective, it is uncomfortable that the women are still doing so many of the household stuff. You know, they're in charge of the domain, and the men are doing the outside stuff. However, she helped me understand that part of, And that's what some academics who have issues with matriarchies, because a lot of them do have women, so they revere the house stuff, the caring of the kids and the caring of the home, the whole society. That's why women is elevated. But you're still putting people in what you might call stereotype roles. What if I'm a woman who doesn't really like to be nurturing and I want to go travel the world and go hunt animals, right? So why do I have to be force fit? And my professor helped me explain, and I love it with the Haudenosaunee, they clarify that there are these jobs, yes, that for ease of language, maybe, or tradition, we call them feminine or masculine. But a man could be made feminine and a woman can be made masculine if those are the jobs that they are better fit for. So it's almost, they understand that while it is caged in, you do put them into these gendered buckets, but there are times that someone actually has a different calling and they have a way of acknowledging that. And I think that was very interesting. And I do make it as part of my documentary to understand how each of these matriarchies deal with those issues. Because that's a very real issue, right? For me, as someone who thinks, even if I was born in a matriarchy, I don't know if I really want to just I love that the home is revered instead of diminished, that caretaking is no longer seen as a menial job, but it still might not, I still feel like it's not going to be my calling. And I want to make sure there's a path for someone like me. And so I think it was helpful that the Haudenosaunee, from what I understand from Professor Mann, have a way to acknowledge that, that you don't, it's like there is a path for people to find their own way as well.
I mean, I think it still shows the challenges or limitations of European colonialism, in the sense that language has to be so structured and the categories are so succinct and so binary, unfortunately, right? And when we look at outside cultures or different cultures, where there's more fluidity there and the language is different, customs are different, but to be kind of codified in a Western, or to be communicated to the West, they have to use some of the same language. And that's where kind of the speed bump lies, where we get tripped up here, right? And we lose that fluidity.
Yeah, you're right. Language matters. I'm thinking the way when I hear Barbara Mann talks about how they see the cosmos having these opposite energies that you need the two to be complete. And in China, growing up Chinese, there's the yin and the yang, and you need the two. So while it's kind of gendered, but they don't get boxed in with Western language. They don't just go straight up, men do this, women do that. There is more poetry, I think, to how they call out those two types of energies and tendencies that ultimately live in all of us.
Yeah. So actually, kind of speaking of that fluidity, how does it work now in terms of, because we talked about different roles and stuff, but the Haudenosaunee were matrilineal, right? They were matriarchal and matrilineal. So are they still matrilineal, or has that shifted?
You ask a great question, Samantha. So if you read the stuff online, of course, they're really trying to reclaim those matriarchal roots. But what has happened to the Haudenosaunee as well as the Dene? So I am right now talking to a Dene woman, potentially adding a fifth tribe into my story, a matrilineal. But I didn't consider the tribes in America initially because they are no longer, right? They lost their matriarchal traditions because of colonization when the white settlers came. So that's because the white settlers only treated with the men. They assumed that these organizations and these tribes were male-driven like them. And even when they kind of know it's not, they don't care. They only wanted to treat with the men. And so by that, a lot of matriarchies, native matriarchies, lost their matriarchal traditions. And there is a movement to reclaim that and bring back that matrilineal. So there's this so they call it the rematriation movement. So I think it's very interesting to watch how they do it, because it's also tough, right? Because there are men now who have been in charge for a while, and there are new perspectives that has happened in the last 100+ years that they also have to work out. You can't just displace.
Okay. So Izzy, I'd like to actually go more in depth about this and so much more in our next segment. We'll take 5 questions and discuss all the work you're doing, go deeper into what you're learning about matriarchies, and maybe how it bumps up next to or against patriarchy. How does that sound?
That sounds wonderful.
Samantha, you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Stay tuned.
Yes.
I actually found out later by a friend that Matthew tried to kill himself after that.
What does it look like to go from a perpetrator of violence to an undaunted ally for those who are vulnerable?
So, that made me feel really guilty, and I couldn't eat anything, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't do anything. I thought I deserved what he got. That's when I started talking to you.
This is the story of Lewis, a 12-year-old who went through a remarkable transformation to become the young man he is today. It's also one of the most powerful things I've ever recorded as part of Breaking the Boy Code, a podcast centered on the inner lives of boys and what it looks like for parents and educators to raise the next generation of men. Created in collaboration with Next Gen Men Podcast Network, listen to Breaking the Boy Code podcast wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back. So we haven't done this in a bit. Samantha, can you give me and Izzy and our audience a reminder of what happens next, how this goes down?
I would love to. So in this second half of the episode, you get to ask 5 questions to our guest, Izzy.
Whew, okay. All right. 5 questions. Only 5 questions. Okay. I got to narrow it down.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
I'll be around. Told you to it, Remoy. 5 questions only.
Just like a Samantha to always hold a Remoy down. That's fine. This is how it goes.
Actually, it gets better. After the 5 questions, our guest gets to ask the producer, not the host, a question. So actually, me and Izzy are going to get to do a little vibing. So I'm excited about that.
Ooh.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, fine. Izzy, this is your chance to ask Samantha why she loves me so much. Get ready?
Well, maybe like more specific to like the show or like this episode, just like podcasting questions, Remoy. But how does that sound, Izzy?
That sounds wonderful.
Awesome. All right, Remoy, take it away.
Okay, yeah. So I've been stressing about this. It always stresses me out because you always want to ask like 10 questions. So then you're like, I got to get 5 in there. Maybe we do this. What is one exciting thing about matriarchies that just blows your mind?
That blows my mind. Well, I guess one thing that made me realize how I am also locked in my ways is there is a very different attitude, generally speaking, towards marriage. And I think it's fascinating because our fear that with a divorce, a family breaks down, what happens to the kids, it's not an issue in matriarchies. So it's almost reversed that, it's almost like the importance of your biological father is like an uncle, as in, of course, they are and they are part, but they're not your day-to-day life, right? Whereas your day-to-day life is your uncle. And all these things are set. In the Minang, they do have marriage. The men move in. But then if they get a divorce, it's not a big deal. People get divorced all the time. Nene, the grandmother in my documentary, she goes, it's like, oh, I've been married and divorced 3 times. And her niece from the Netherlands was like, wait, what? It's like, yeah, if I don't like him, I kick him out, And
amazing.
And I realize if you come to think of it this way, in a patriarchy, why do we control a woman's body so much? It's because it's the only way that you can guarantee the kids are yours when it's patriarchal, right? That you control your wife, you control them to this, and then you use religion and all these things and romance to make marriage and love turn into this sacrosanct thing. And women who stray have always been punished more than men who stray because it upsets the whole patriarchy and this, property is being passed through the male line, the name. So when that gets messed up, it like the males are just like, no, that's why they have to control the women's body. And I think in matriarchies, you always know who your mother is. So the system, this power structure, how property and land is passed on is not threatened when marriages don't stick together. And that just blows my mind, right? Because we have to realize, because I have a lot of emotions around that. It's like, I'm not going to, after making this, I tell my husband, doesn't mean you can go free love everywhere, And it doesn't mean I want that for myself. But that's because when you grow up in the patriarchy, you don't even realize those elements that you think of it that has nothing to do with patriarchy is actually to do with it. Our sense of what love is, our sense of romance, all the movies and books we've read about romance and true love and staying together and being there forever and ever. It's like, oh my Lord, but I have learned to recognize it.
No, I love that. Me and Samantha in the show are always kind of trying to, we talk about unpacking the performance of masculinity, but we also are what that means is looking at the conditioning and socialization of how these kind of things that we may call normal or normative are actually not. They're just ways of culture that have been transmitted to us, right? Especially when you were talking about the father figure, and I always wonder, especially is that more of we need a father and this central father figure kind of thing that's promoted in the American West, is that biological, or is that more socialized in this particular community, that importance of the biological father? I'm not saying it's one way or the other, but it's interesting to see potentially a different society and the practice around that society that maybe diminish that. There's still male potential figures around, but the biological father's importance may be diminished. And as you were kind of noting, that there may be a reason for that supposed importance in this culture, and that's for owning and controlling women. It's fascinating to think about it that way.
Yes. Yeah, that's unbelievable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering whether it's that or is there something else you've discovered? If you have a magic potion that you could just implement it dramatically in the West and change things immediately, what would that one thing be?
I would say just how we think of leadership and how we think. I mean, I don't know if you heard me earlier that I have to keep changing my own language, correcting myself, because I'll use things lead and drive, and I said no, guide. It should be guide, because it's a very different idea of what leadership is. That leadership is about bringing the community together, making sure that everyone is heard, and guiding decisions based on the good of everyone. It's what in the West, so there are things that in the West we have to unpack, right? I work a lot in corporate America. Consensus in some ways is seen as a dirty word. It's consensus is seen as, it means that it's the lowest common denominator. We're not willing to make the hard decision. We're, choosing to please everyone instead of doing the right thing. As my advisor says, right for whom? Right for whom? It's usually the right decision for a few at the top, right? Look at all the layoffs that's happening in America. It's who has the guts to do the right decision and right size the company? Right for whom? When your profit margins are so huge. And I think in matriarchies, consensus is not a dirty word. It's truly grassroots leadership, making sure everyone is heard. This belief, I think the Minang has this belief that there's a reason why you grow your rice in a safe environment first before planting it out. And they believe that you have to nurture everyone, and that when everyone is taken care of, even the weakest, then the community is stronger. And we tend to have we got to not let the weak ones drag us behind and pull us down. And we don't see how when you can find a way to create a society to make sure even the weakest are taken care of, you end up with a stronger society. So I think it's just a very different view of leadership, that the hard decision actually means don't rush into something that has immediate benefit by sacrificing the future. which is what we do, what we call, it's like, and so it's like they are thinking about the big picture. They're thinking about the larger, and when I say broader community, it means future generations too. That's how they think. And I feel like we need more of that. And language matters, because even those of us who are feminists use a lot of the language that's very violent, that's very borrowed from the patriarchy, right? We're going to fight, we're going to lead, and there isn't this sense of hearing all the different perspectives.
This work you're doing specifically, I don't want to use be corny to say, but it's like in a way a celebration. So my question is why do matriarchies deserve celebrating?
I would say I'll go actually beyond that. I'm not even sure I'm so big-hearted as just purely celebrating. I'm being very selfish here. I want to learn from them. I want us to see what they're doing right and figure out how to fix the problems that we have in the West. I live in the West, so I have a very practical reason for making this documentary. I want more of us to see this. I want more of us to realize that the way we do things here is not the only way, and that there could be other better ways. And I'm not saying I want to wholesale import everything. I understand America is its own thing. The West is its own thing. Sure. But I think part of growing and learning is learning when people are doing things right and figuring out how we could do it and make it work for our society.
Samantha, that's 3 questions, I believe.
Yeah, that's 3 questions. You're doing great. Doing great, Mr. Phillip. Doing great.
I got 2 more left. How do we do this? Okay, let's just do this. I got to know, there's got to be something. What flipped the switch for you to get into this work or this subject matter specifically?
The switch flipped when I was really young. I grew up, my grandmother, very close. She has bound feet. I don't know if you know what bound feet.
Oh my God, yes. From back in the day with the smaller shoes.
Yes.
Wow.
So I grew up, she had a cane. I was close to her. Part of my job as a kid with my aunts was constantly looking for shoes for her. Shoes that would fit because they're small, but that would be comfortable because they hurt. Because I don't know if you know how bound feet are created. You cut a little girl's foot. You cut, and then you tie it very tightly with cloth to keep it small. And every few years you cut again, and you tie again to keep it small, for the pleasure of men who believe that women with dainty little feet are precious and to be valued. And they can run away. And so that's what my grandmother had. So looking for shoes that would be comfortable, that are small, that are also going to be dignified, right? You don't want her, what do you see? Hello Kitty, Mickey Mouse. That's not what a grandmother wants to wear on her feet. And so it was a constant battle looking for shoes for her as a kid. And that's what flipped the switch long ago, that I knew we lived in a man's world from when I was very young. A world where women have to cut themselves to fit in, to be valued, to please the other gender. But I also know my grandma also gave me the confidence, right, that we could do anything, because she walked on those feet over 500 miles from northern China to Hong Kong during the revolution to get her kids to safety. She walked on foot, pregnant, on those bound feet, and defied people who thought that if you bind women's feet, they can't run away.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm very lucky to have some of the perspectives I have or the sensitivities I have, because I grew up with a single mother who had to save my life in ways and escape horrible, violent situations. And luckily, having that exposure as a kid and seeing that as it undermines your sense of normalcy and what's going on in the world. And it's lucky that we get to do this work, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got one more question. And we have that Instagram live show. Maybe Izzy can hop on that in a couple weeks and we can do more questions. But let me just get my last question.
Please. Yes.
Are you okay? Okay, let's just do this. What's been the most challenging thing when it comes to like getting support for this work? Or I can imagine you get undermined about this work, or like skepticism. Like what does that look like, or what's been the most challenging thing, or how do you fight that? I don't know, something in there.
Yeah. I mean, there are many layers to it. Artists, it's just a tough time in general for all artists, independent artists. Getting funds as podcasters, you're a creative person, so it's tough. But I will say, so for someone who's always been interested in gender, until I started reading about matriarchies about now 8-10 years ago, I didn't even know matriarchies existed. I don't know how many of you, like, I talk to people and very few people know it. And one of my advisors, who is an early pioneer of matriarchal studies, when I visited her, reminded me how she's not surprised because the patriarchy doesn't want this story to go out. The publishers, the TV shows, and like, I still to this day am constantly struggling to raise funds for this, going to pitches and whatnot. And she was very kind, but also like made me realize how she said she was not surprised. She left academia and created her own, sort of institute for studying matriarchal studies at some point when she was just done. She's like, the world is still very patriarchal, and it doesn't mean they're out there with, it's not like they're out there with signs of down with women, but it's in the subconscious. And that's harder to fight, right? Like that when men are uncomfortable when they're hearing about all these matriarchies, or they're just not interested, So the people who are still because it's still a lot of males in decision-making power when it comes to how funds are distributed, what gets seen, what gets published, what gets put online or out on the air. They're just not choosing these stories. So I remember when I first started working on this, and a lot of my advisors, because they were the first generation doing this, hold a lot of these fights still in them. You could say grudges. And I remember thinking, oh, I hear you. The world is different now. It's so much better. And I remember when I first started making this documentary, I even thought, oh, by the time I'm done, like, people go like, why do we need to talk about this? Everything is going to be so equal. It's all going to be like, and then suddenly in the last 3 years, things went backwards so much. And I'm getting whiplash. I think many feminists of my generation are getting whiplash. And my advisors who are from the previous generation before kind of have this, we told you so a little bit of attitude. Oh, no. Like, you thought things are changing. It's not we thought it's like it's the fear of female-led stories, and I underestimated how much fear there is by a lot of people. And I guess I'm giving you a very long answer to this. Like, it's not easy. But I still think I have it better than the previous generation of women. It's just not as good as I thought it was going to be. And, I have it better, but it's not as good. At least my feet are not being bound, right? I'm not wearing a corset. And so, but that said, it's like, well, I can't believe I live in a world now that I'm fighting to control my body and what, and I'm hearing horror stories of it, of all these violence against women. Somehow the internet went from this amazing thing when it first came now to be this horrible, like, magnifying glass for all the worst things in our instincts and in our society. Like all the, we got to find a way out of this. We got to.
But we need to get like Abigail Disney and all her fork film monies and get it to you, Izzy. Gosh dang it. Female-led stories and films and documentaries. Let's go.
And honestly, like what your podcast is and what the sort of the group of the next gen men sort of story, that's also part of it. That's so important, because I do understand why there is a backlash, because men, there's no other story than if you rip out a role from someone and you don't give them something else that makes them excited that they could follow, then they're going to fight it and they're going to feel like you're disenfranchising them. And I think that is one of the very real issues that I think we need to address. That's why there are so many angry young men, and we need more podcasts like this, work like, that you're doing with Next Gen Men, because we need to find new stories and new role models for the next generation.
Izzy, just to keep it on female-led stories. Izzy, it's your turn. You get to take the mic. You get to kind of speak with Samantha with whatever you like, or ask her the one question you'd like to ask Samantha.
Oh, A for effort, Remoy. Good job.
I really would love to ask the two of you. I love the work you're doing. I can't say I studied everything, right? I went through your website, but I love it. And one of the things I struggle with, I'm looking for advice. You see, I'm a very practical person, is I feel like with what I'm doing, like when I go to talks and talk about matriarchy, I keep asking myself how to bring men into the conversation. How to bring men in where they also don't feel threatened, right? I know, why do we have to do that? But it's like, I'm being practical. It's important. So I'd love to hear from the two of you how you've dealt with that, right? Because I think the current next gen of the feminist movement needs to face that. I think the problem we're in right now is because we did not take that problem seriously enough.
I think that's a really good question. I feel like what has worked in terms of people engaging with masculinity, of course, we're a boutique podcast, right? But like people who have really kind of been into the conversation is making the connection between, and I think that's kind of the premise of masculinity in general, is making the connection between what men deal with on a day-to-day basis and patriarchy. Because a lot of men are out there like, patriarchy, that's just like a buzzword that women use because they're mad, right? Or like they'll talk about feminism and it'll just kind of be buzzwords. But I think what's missing for a lot of people is how patriarchy directly, it's like you said, we don't know the extent of control that patriarchy has on our lives. And like, it's not as obvious as we would think. And, I think that what was really important in terms of the podcast is understanding, like, when we talk about like patriarchal dominance and control, like, you don't just get to dominate and control and yippee, you're like a happy person because you're on top. There is an actual like negative impact on men who dominate because they don't ever get to be seen. They don't ever get to be liberated. They always have to be that person. And like, what is the impact on them and their life that they have to be like that? So it's really creating a direct connection between the negative effects of patriarchy in men's everyday lives, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I sometimes wonder if there's a way to change the language too, but it's so hard. It's like, because patriarchy, matriarchy becomes so tied to gender. And then it's like, but what we're really fighting is more oppression and exploitation, right? A world system that's about that. And what we're trying to raise is a value system that's based on sharing and egalitarianism and community. So that's, but then I realized those language are just so broad, and patriarchy and matriarchy it's like easier to get someone to pay attention. But I always remind myself, it's really not about men versus women. It's about a world view of what is a better way to lead our lives and lead our societies.
No, I mean, I think, Izzy, that's why like, your work in this particular project, this documentary story that's doing so much, like traveling the world and showing all these different examples and getting into it in depth, like is such a huge opportunity and so important for us to see because it's so diverse and it's showing like a lot of what could be. And that's exciting. I want to know, like, where can people find updates for the project? How could people support? Where can they stay plugged in for future updates?
Yeah, so if you go to matriarch.world, that's the website where we have created for the documentary. So it's matriach.world, ORLD. ORL. Yeah. Okay, I spelled it correctly. So matriarch.world. You could sign up for my newsletter. I try to send out a newsletter every couple of months. They could support also by, we have, if you go to that website on the support page, we're part of the International Documentary Association. So we're actually a nonprofit project. So you could donate through the IDA. It's tax deductible. And because it's through the IDA, I'm not taking it out on a vacation in the Bahamas. They don't disperse the money until they know what it's being used for. And if you are in a company that matches funds and has, like, for instance, Benevitti is how a lot of big corporations match funds. We're on Benevitti. So search for us in the International Documentary Association. Search for Matriarch. So if you donate through Benevitti, through your work, your company will match your donation.
Oh, Samantha.
What can I do for you, Remoy?
What do you think your fiance is going to do after he hears this episode? Like, is he going to take back his proposal?
Alas, I have been blessed with the curse of partners never listening to our creative endeavors. I'm sure you can relate, or maybe not. I don't know.
It's a well-known curse. I don't want to throw anybody in the bus, but it's a well-known curse. But still, nonetheless, what would be your proposal dish? The world needs to know.
I have to say, my boo loves everything I make because I can throw what down in the kitchen. But upon reflection, I'll probably hit him with pasta dish, homemade pasta. That's my jam. Pretty skilled at it. Feel me?
You're going to propose with a pasta dish?
Listen. The high fashion, high class, highbrow pasta that I make in these here parts is something that you have yet to come across, okay? But, and I would make it for you, but you're on the vegan life, so maybe one day I'll learn how to make that.
If you want to get that recipe and more of Samantha's excuses, or maybe just some more information on matriarchies and other details covered in this episode, you can head on over to masculinelypod.com.
I'm dropping, actually, a food blog very soon where you can have my scallop risotto recipe. JK, I am not, but we'll be sharing more of these details on the performance masculinity and the like some photos and some other stories from this episode on social media. And you can find us on all of the platforms at Masculinity Pod. That's always spelled with a K. And we'll also be picking up the conversation with Izzy on our, you guessed it, IG live show, Beneath the Mask. So please come check that out and bring your questions.
You know what else you can do for us? Rate us 5 stars, why don't you? Or leave us a review wherever you get your pods. Honestly, it's such a huge help to grow our community for change.
Absolutely. And as one RGP1 would say, that's 5 stars, 5 stars. Emphasis on the 5 stars.
Way too much emphasis, way too much emotion. I keep it pretty chill. She doesn't know how to do Remoy. That's fine. On that bad impersonation,
wow.
Until next time, it's your boy, Remoy George Phillip, the first.
And it's Samantha and Zessie. Thank you so much for listening.
Peace.
Ciao.
Izzy's dope.
Yeah, this is awesome. That was not a put on. I am very excited for her documentary.